Okay, so before we get started, I just want to say that this is our first step towards recipe development for school lunch programs. So any feedbacks, advices, experience that you guys can share will be highly appreciated. So we put together 2 recipes for the purpose of today's discussion, and the main difference between those 2 recipes is the sorting source and also preparation steps. And one is more work to prepare, and versus the other one is much easier and straightforward. And also for these both recipes, we are using grade 9 to 12 lunch programs, nutritional guidelines. So we can make sure that we are meeting the nutritional program nutrition requirements for the program. So the first recipe we have is garam masala with jasmine rice, and this particular recipe requires a lot more ingredients, simply because we would like to know where the sodium is coming from, so we can control the total sodium content. With that, it also requires a little more preparation work to get a recipe or to get the meal ready. So for this one, we are using our savory strips, and we call that our version 3. And this recipe is based on a 2-pound incoming strips, so, and then multiply to reach that 100 serving. So so you see 2 columns, and one is a 2-pound recipe, and then the second column is a 100 serving recipe. And then with this, since we are using a masala blend and we are actually making our own blend, so you will have to go and get all these different spices or seasonings to make your own blend. And with that, so we have to make our own gravy, and it's a lot more work to prepare the gravy. So and on the left, you see all the seasonings that we are using to create this recipe.
Do you just multiply, Jen? This is Tom. When you go from to 100 servings, do you just multiply by a certain number across to get to 88, 88, 88? Is that what you do?
Yes. So if you look at the 2-pound recipe, right? So that 2-pound recipe for our product, 71 grams is per serving. So with that, I think it's around 11 serving for that 2 pounds, or 11, 12 servings for that 2-pound recipe. So to get to that 100 servings, you multiply by 8.8. So that's how you get that 88 grams for the cumin, 88 grams for the paprika, and so on and forth.
That's not the right way to do it, though. When you start to go to scale, you don't have to increase. Sometimes for flavors like bay leaves and cumin and curry and things like that, when you go to scale, you don't have to multiply the full 11 times. It will be too spicy. You should make this recipe, and I think you'll find it'll be much less than 88. It'll probably be like 60, 60. From my experience, when you go to scale, you don't just multiply every ingredient across, especially spices. It gets too strong and polarizing. And I'm saying this respectfully. This is just something I've done wrong so many times. I know not to do it now.
I agree 100%, especially with things like cumin and curry powder and the garam masala. They're very strong, and in larger quantities, you can actually use less and you still have great flavor.
Now, is there a time element as well? I mean, considering we're not making this for home consumption, it's bagged and, stored for potentially a long time. Is there any time concerns? Are you going to get more flavor?
Absolutely. That's great, Michael. 100%. It will mature in the bags. Even frozen, it will mature.
Yeah. If this is something that is pre-seasoned and packaged and sent out to the schools or whomever, as it sits, it will get stronger.
And this might be a great question for Randall. Randall, when you're developing recipes, what's the general student population that you're making a recipe for? And then how do you just make that recipe over and over again, or do you scale that, and how do you scale it?
You mean in terms of number or in terms of?
Yeah, like if you're making an initial recipe to try out, is it generally for 25 students, or is there kind of a set number for a new recipe that you want to try out?
Yeah, so depends on the recipe, but generally speaking, you know, if it's for a high school, we'll try it at one particular high school because it's a good barometer for the others. It's always identified as such because of the kids that go there and the places they come from in the district. So in terms of numbers, we probably do about 200 or 300, depending on what it is.
Right, but when you develop a new recipe, when you're doing that for the first time, like in your recipe book, do you generally do it for 20 servings and then scale that to how many you need, or is there a certain number that you make a recipe around?
I try to do one hotel pan.
Okay.
Because we typically try to measure things out in hotel pans. That's what we want them to serve them in. That's what we want to send them out in. And that's generally speaking about 2 gallons. So in terms of serving size, that, you know, very much depends on what it is.
Okay. And then
Could be, anywhere from 20 to 60 servings.
And then when you scale that one hotel pan, how do you scale that recipe? Do you usually multiply it, or is that more of a trial and error?
So that one hotel pan recipe gets inputted into our nutritional software. That's also our, like, you know, it's pretty much our all-encompassing software. It takes care of all of our inventory and everything else. It's called Edison. It's a Heartland product. And yeah.
I didn't know if you're using Seaboard or Computrition. Computrition's outdated, but that's more for hospitals. But Seaboard is the new thing. But this is off subject maybe, but how do you deal with hot holding for your service?
Depends on the site. Some sites use the heating cabinet. Some sites have a roll-in heating cabinet. Some sites, for most of our sites, they have a GA speed line.
Okay.
Some sites have a steam well. You know, we have some sites that were built back in the 50s, and we have some that were built 10 years ago. So among our 55 sites, it kind of runs the gamut. Some of them are super nice, and some of them are less than desirable.
Okay, thanks. I didn't mean to go off subject. I was just curious. That was one of the things I had on my notes.
I'm here to answer questions.
So Randall, as we're putting this recipe book together, would it be more helpful to develop the recipes around a hotel pan size for serving for most districts?
That's a good question. I don't know, because for me personally, the way we run our program, yes. For others, you know, that are packing out individual meals in the way that we are trying to get away from, perhaps not. You know, we have packing machines from formed plastics that we're trying to get away from because, you know, we spend so much money on one-time use plastics. It's kind of ridiculous. It's just not, you know, not sustainable financially or for the planet for that matter. And in that regard, you know, it doesn't matter how you scale it. You know, it's the portion is the portion. So you could make one portion at a time, or you can make 20 and scale it. It's not a big deal because the software does it for you one way or another. It doesn't make much of a difference.
Got it. Jin, does that help clarify?
Yeah, I guess using the hotel pan would be a good guideline for us moving forward for this kind of recipe development, right? So I guess when it comes to scaling the recipe up, I guess there will be some try and error to make sure that from flavor or seasoning standpoint, we are not overly seasoning the product. I guess that will be something when it gets to the school level, they will still have to try and verify, you know, from the recipe standpoint.
So just for volume's sake, it's around 2 gallons for a 4-inch hotel pan, and that's what we're basing ours on.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that feedback. Very
No
helpful.
problem. Of course.
So moving to the next slide. So as for preparations, first you will have to prepare the strips, and to prepare the strips, it's pretty straightforward. What you do is you will mix the strips with the oil and half of the masala seasoning blend, and then spray the strips on a baking sheet or pan and single layer, so you can get even cooking, and then you bake the product at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 minutes, and you will turn and mix the sheet halfway through, so you can get even cooking. And to mix the gravy, since we are using a lot of fresh, I guess, spices, you will have to pre-blend the garlic, the ginger, and also the peeled onion to make a fine paste. And then from there, in a cooking saucepan, you will add a little bit. You will add oil, and then cook the paste first, and then when you smell the aroma in the air, then at that time you will put in your masala seasoning blend and cook for another minute or two under medium heat, and then you will add your crushed tomato and cook for another 5 to 10 minutes. After that, you will add your salt and sugar, and then also your heavy cream. You will mix everything together and until it's smooth and creamy. So I guess my question from this from the procedure and steps standpoint, would this be too much work for the school to do, or this is okay for them to handle?
I think baking at 400 degrees for 20 minutes is too much. It'll dry out and get chewy. I did biryani yesterday as a test, and it took about 7 minutes to reach 160 degrees. And then, but in terms of a school, I think Randall probably have better information on that. And if it were in a central kitchen and they had a steam pot, you could make a large amount of the gravy. And maybe the school would cook the strips. I don't know, Randall, what do you think?
Yeah, I could see it going that way. And blending anything when it comes to doing it 200 gallons at a time always is a little bit tricky because you're blending a lot. I saw a really cool machine when I was in Boulder, an emulsifier for a 200-gallon kettle. That was super awesome. I really want to get one of those and play with it, but they're like 180 grand. So.
Randall, do you think people would, it seems to me from my food service days, it's way too much work and way too dangerous to expect the cooks to flip them over after they cooked. I think it should be one step. I couldn't imagine anybody working in food service that would take 6 or 8 trays, sheet pans of browned product and have to flip them all over with a spatula. That doesn't seem safe to me.
I agree. Especially for a high school that would be doing, you know, if I've got a high school that's doing 500 servings, that's a lot. But
and I think you can half the sugar and salt on this recipe, Jen. It seems to be way too salty. It should be around 550 maximum on salt. I bet you with all the spices and all the fat from the cream and all the umami and sweetness from the onions, I don't think you could half the sugar and salt and it would be perfect. I would recommend you consider trying that before you go with this recipe.
Got it. Thank you for the feedback. And we're actually going to talk about a nutritional standpoint or nutrient standpoint where we are comparing to sodium, saturated fat, and also calorie. So that would be the next slide. So so here the majority of the sodium is actually coming from the salt that we are adding. The majority of seasonings that we use here doesn't have any sodium. So with that, we have much better sodium control in that regard per 2.5 ounce serving in our case. Sodium wise, we have around 400 milligram, and calorie wise, we are right in the range between 750 and 850. And for saturated fat, from calorie standpoint, is under 10%. It's right about 10%. So yeah, so for this recipe, we are actually meeting the sodium requirement way below that 11 something 100 milligram per meal serving. So so that's one of the reasons that we want to showcase this recipe. A lot more work, but from sodium control standpoint, it's a lot easier for us to control sodium. If there's not enough sodium, we can add more salt. If there's way too many sodium, since we are adding salt separately, we could certainly reduce the amount of sodium that we're adding as well.
Can I make one more suggestion? I would, Randall,
Absolutely.
please tell me what you think, or Paul, but I would cut it into larger chunks, because then it would take a little bit longer to cook. It would be less labor for the cooks. And if it was a little bit larger, it would take a little bit longer, so you get the caramelization you're looking for rather than strips. I would like put it into like 1-inch cubes, or maybe double the size you're talking about. If that's just what I would do for you to consider.
Yeah, and what I've experienced, I have tried cooking this with almost every method, but when I do it in a convection oven, I do not flip it, and what you end up with is a fully cooked product at 160 degrees, 165. After just a few minutes with the strips, the bottom side that is touching the pan is generally browned a little bit. The top side is not. So there is really, I mean, you know, if you were in a fine dining restaurant and you want both sides to have some Maillard on it, great. But for school or cafeteria type service, as long as it's cooked and it has some browning, I think that's fine. And the strips work well for that. I haven't played with anything else. Sometimes the strips break up into smaller pieces, like you're saying, Thomas, with you know, like a 1-inch piece. But they all cook fairly evenly. Some of them are thinner and they get a little bit drier, but
Well, if he changes the cooking method, if he only puts oil in the pan and not the sauce, then it'll brown on both sides, and then he strains it, and then you have to take that oil out of the recipe, because those calories no longer in the meal. So you have to do an experiment of when you strain the cooked product and you have that residual oil that's no longer in the recipe. Take that fat out of the recipe, because no one's eating that, and then put the sauce on. You'll have the caramelization you want, and it's a lot easier to work with.
Yeah, so that's really good food feedback. I guess the oven we have here is a benchtop small oven, so it's really not that powerful. That's why we have to cook the product under such high temperature and such a long time to get the browning. So what I hear is getting the surface brown is not that critical. So with that, I think we have a little bit of room to reduce not only the amount of oil that we're adding, and also reduce the cooking time and also temperature as well. And I will take a note and try to modify, I guess, the cooking procedure and steps here.
You could also make a mixture of paprika and onion powder and some of those spices, cumin, and shake that, put it in the shaker and put that on with the oil, and then roast it, and then you'll have beautiful color, and you won't have to overcook it and get the brown. It'll be beautiful, and then put the sauce on afterwards. That's what I would do.
That's a really good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I did with the biryani. I did because it had the yogurt marinade, and that browned quickly. So, you know, there are different techniques to make it look good and still taste good at the same time without drying it out.
Okay, well, we are getting to the end of our hour. I think, Jen, you could connect with some people individually. I think, you know, if you're open to it, you might be a great resource to bounce some of our recipe development off of as well, as that's kind of what you're doing with the Humane Society. And then, you know, Tom has some great ideas as far as the spices, and Paul as well. He has a lot of experience. So let's connect on that. And we'll reconvene on some new topics next month and get everybody all together again. But thank you for coming out. We're looks like Randall has one more thing to add. If anybody has some last comments, Randall, you can chime in.
Oh yeah. Only thing about the cut, it's a little known fact in school food. The smaller the better. Most kids eat with sporks. So making it bigger, while easier to cook and everything, it's really great. But with the kids try to eat it with the sporks, it doesn't really help them.
Interesting.
Valuable piece of information for our R&D.
Especially if it's elementary school kids. It always drives me crazy watching the poor kindergartners try to eat anything, even small things with a spork. It's I feel so bad for those
Spork
kids.
size.
Yeah.
Are they like
Luckily-
plastic
Okay.
sporks? Are they disposable sporks, Randall, like plastic or metal?
So we've got in our school district, we've got some that are plastic, some that are wooden, some that are like a bamboo.
Mhm.
And the wooden ones are terrible because they're like flat.
Mm.
So kids trying to eat cereal with them. I was like, these are garbage.
You get that wood taste in your mouth, like eating a popsicle. It tastes like wood
Yeah,
after a while.
Exactly. So
I'm surprised you guys are using any of the like the potato, whatever they
starch.
are. We used to do that. I was a trainer for Ted's Montana Grill. Yes, it is.
got one right here.
Yep. Okay.
we tried those ones too. The problem is like dispensing them.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up here. If anybody has any topics that they'd like to visit next time, we'd be happy to get them out to our group and get some additional feedback. Otherwise, I'll send everybody an invite for next month. And if you're able to join in, that would be great. And we'll connect everybody with further follow-up questions and send out a recap of our meeting today. But thank you, everybody, for joining. And so long from Florida.
Thanks, Max.
Great.
See you guys later.
That's great.